advocating for a transition or talking to climate scientists about like, well, why are you still using oil and gas? And it really, to me, it's always felt like a really weird thing to say to people. It's like, well, we're all stuck in this, whether you call it, we're all stuck on the grid or we're all stuck in the matrix of having to rely on oil and gas, on these conglomerates that have sort of forced, whether it's through lobbying or through anti-competitive practices, to keep us dependent on oil and gas. But solar, everybody's able to, whether it's through community solar or whether it's through, putting solar on your roof. When you're able to do that, you are able to escape some of that dependency. And it changes the dynamics of people being reliant and being consumers of the market to actually being market participants and taking some of that control over the monopolies or over the utilities. So that's one of the big reasons I really have why I really like being part of the solar industry. But I wanted to talk about my career. I think that's and my career path. From the very beginning, I had always wanted to be doing something that I cared about, being involved in having my career mean something more than just a paycheck. But for, the beginning of my career, I wasn't able necessarily to do that. I was in a variety of different technologies. I did things including like satellite communications or water tech or even like venture capital type of stuff. I did some AI. The second half of my career was when I was able to get into solar and clean energy. And even during that, once I got in, I had to jump out a few times, whether it was the economy or whether it was, what the opportunities were, or where before, sometimes it was where it was located, before things moved to more remote. So even if you're not in it now, even if you're starting out your career, I just wanted to make that very clear. Like, just because it has been a passion of mine for probably since I was a teenager, it took time for me to be able to get into the industry. So until I got into the industry, I ended up focusing on, building my marketing experience and skills. So whatever those transferable skills were that I would end up needing as a marketing expert in solar, I worked on building those, whether it was strategic planning or developing comms or product launches. I worked on doing those in other industries so I could bring those skill sets to the industry that I really wanted to get into. And that's sort of when the right place, right time happened for me. And that's when I joined a company called Conergy. And that was my first step into the solar industry business. And it led to sort of a cascading effect in my career, which allowed me to get additional positions, like as I progressed. As sort of mentioned in my introduction, it gave me, being in the industry now for a very long time, I've been able to get a lot of different technology expertise, which has opened up a lot of different opportunity for me. As PV is photovoltaic, which literally means turning photons into a current, so photons into electricity. And any other questions? Well, I guess we can wait till the end. If there's any other questions about what any of this tech means, I'm happy to go into it. So please write those down and I'm happy to get to that. I wanted to talk a little bit about a specific accomplishment that I had in my career. And one of the things that that sort of helped me move my career forward in solar. So one of the companies that I joined was I joined it as it was a small startup. It was a late stage startup, it was when I joined, it was considered a very niche solution. People were still talking about it as only some small roofs in resident, like a small portion of roofs in the residential solar market will be interested in this product. People did not see it as a big business opportunity. Oh, sorry about that. And as the company, I joined the company as a marketing generalist. I was doing things like penetration into new markets, a lot of content, and I sort of started filling this gap of public and media relations, where that was only a small part of my job. But and I ended up at that company over time building up a PR department, and it became a very central part to the company's goals. So the first step was internal persuasion, trying to convince the company the impact that public and media relations could have for the company and for the company's growth. The second part, I really started building up relationships with the public and with the media, with the public, and gave credibility not only to the company's name, but also gave credibility to the efforts that public and media relations would have on the company. And as the company was growing, that also meant expanding my scope instead of just doing, press releases, but adding on to that, doing thought leadership articles, having social media tied in, doing important product launches and pulling that into a larger media strategy and a larger public relations strategy. And then scaling that up as a company grew. It was going into different regions and different markets and different segments. Instead of only being residential, it went into commercial and industrial and utility, and then eventually reaching top tier media. And I was at the company for about 7 years, so that meant the company was also growing as I was building the PR department. So it went from being about 200 person startup that was trying to reach profitability to, when I left after 7 years, after I built up this PR department, to becoming a top industry player. It was a multi-billion-dollar company. It had a global footprint, and it had over 2,000 people. So having that was like one of the big accomplishments that I had in the industry. But I also want to be clear that it was not always a smooth sailing. So there's something called the solar coaster, and there's lots of up and downs in any young industry, but specifically solar, because there's a lot of different dependencies. There's inflation rates, there are interest rates, there are changing support from government, both at the national level and the state level. So I'll give you an example of something that from my career that I also experienced. So, while I was at a company that was a unicorn, I've also been in what happens with a lot of like startups and growing companies, especially in an industry that is going through a lot of change and evolution. Is sometimes they get acquired, sometimes they go out of business, sometimes the business structure or strategy that they have, it no longer works. So in 2010, 2011 was when I joined a company called Connergy. And that was my first step into the solar industry. And I was super excited about it. It was one of the largest global distributors in the world. And just as exciting was that it was moving to trying to move up the supply chain from a distributor to become a manufacturer. And it was looking to become a manufacturer of panels, and also of solar panels, and also of racking equipment for those solar panels. So how those solar panels get attached to the roof or get put on the ground. And both of those are commodities. But the company was trying to create premium for these commodities. At the same time, China had invested a lot of money into their solar segment, and were basically flooding the market with really cheap solar panels. So to some degree, that was great because it meant solar was more more financially attractive to more people. It really helped, as you can see here with this uptrend, it really did help move the market forward. And a lot of different companies started selling solar panels, manufacturing panels in more cost-effective ways, which has led to so much more solar being sold. But for the company I was at, it meant that it was what they were doing no longer made financial sense. And within a year, the company basically went bankrupt. So, my first step into solar wasn't necessarily the easiest step. And, there were ups and downs. And I think you're going to see that with a lot of climate tech, but putting the experience under your belt, whether it is with a unicorn and a company that really grows or with a company that fails, I think is super important. I have probably learned just as much from companies that didn't succeed as I have from companies that have succeeded. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is, well, that was my experience 10 years ago. There is so much more opportunity now. I have seen like the climate funding just skyrocket. There is so many more startups that are happening. There's so much more money going into climate tech. And I think just there's a lot more opportunity out there. One of the reasons solar was almost my go-to 10 years ago was because, or 13 years ago, was because it didn't exist. Nothing else existed really outside of solar and wind. There was not much other, batteries were people were barely talking about batteries then, much less EVs. So I think that there's just a lot more opportunity for you out there, and you are deciding to join climate tech, not only at a time when it's desperately needed, but at a time where there's a lot more opportunity for you. Also, in terms of opportunity, there's a lot more variety of different climate tech that's out there. So, if we just look at this really quickly, whether it's something about, let's see, EV charging, or whether it's, pulling in AI to solar, to grid management, to all the new tech, whether it's about financing or there's a lot of really cool stuff happening in agriculture and in food, or like resource management. It's about finding what moves you and then diving deep into it. And diving deep can be things like finding books to read about, finding the right people on LinkedIn to follow, and to make connections with. And then in terms of sort of next steps, is that what we just talked about, the climate solution knowledge. What do you care about? What do you want to dive deep into? What do you want to get more information on? And that is really, really crucial when you're interviewing, to be able to sort of talk the talk. When they're talking, for instance, when they're talking about what their tech does, or who the users are, or what the other stakeholders might be. Being able to understand that in an interview can help set you apart. We talked about transferable skills, how crucial those are, and focusing on those. It's not, any solar company, any climate tech company, they still need accounting, they still need HR, it's not a foreign business that doesn't follow all the typical business models. And then a career transition mindset. And I think that sort of goes to what I spoke about, like there's going to be ups and downs, and it may take time and patience. And, sometimes it's getting some volunteer stuff under your belt. As an example, one of the things that I did before I was able to get into climate tech is I volunteered for like this energy forum, where they were an NGO that was trying to help move the government into better energy policies. That was like an internship or some volunteer work. That's my presentation. I wanted to open it up to questions and dive down into anything. I didn't want to spend too much time just talking about myself. So that's it. I'll we can open it up to have a discussion.
Great. We have, thank you so much, Jessica. We have several questions in our Q&A pod, and I did ask folks to upvote the ones that they are, most interested in hearing a response from you. So I'll start with those that have the most votes. Anusha asks, Jessica, can you please elaborate on how you transitioned from a non-climate marketer to starting your work in energy? And I think you did address some of this. Were there any trade-offs that you had to make? For example, a junior role or moving geographies, and what skills or experience did you highlight in this process to your potential new employers?
Yes.
And I think you did touch on
so I'll say for some of the specific questions, I'll say yes. Some of it was geography change. Some of it was I had reached like marketing manager level. Some in a previous company, I went down to I think like marketing specialist or associate for my first jump in. I think I'm not sure about like salary. And part of that's because of some of my jumps in between different countries and things like that. So what my salary would have looked like before. So that's a hard one for me to answer because salaries are so different with different benefits in different countries. But yeah, I definitely did. I don't necessarily know that that's required. And sometimes it can be changing what your benefits are also. So if you really like the startup feel, then maybe it's thinking about some other benefits in terms of equity in the company or something along those lines.
Very good. Thank you. Jared Hutchinson asks, with low interest rates gone for the foreseeable future, how do you see that impacting residential solar growth? Do you find more near-term growth in community solar or other implementations?
So interest rates are hurting the entire industry. And as with a lot of other industries. One of the things that I see happening is that third-party ownership is going to get bigger, which means things like power purchase agreements or leases instead of doing loans or cash payments. I think is going to be the transition. At the same time, energy rates keep going up. So we're seeing utility prices increase. We're seeing with wars going on right now how that impacts the oil and gas industry and also the electricity rates that people are experiencing. So then in addition, we have the Inflation Reduction Act. I think that short term it's hurting the market, but long term, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and it's about ensuring that third party ownership is widely available at attractive prices.
Thank you. The next question comes from Joe McFadden, and I actually had the same question, so I'm glad you asked it, Joe. First, he says, thanks for a really inspiring talk. I really like the periodic table of climate tech that you showed in your slides. Is that your own? Or if not, can you mention the source?
Most of it is not my own. I would say probably 90% of it. I don't remember where I found that. I cannot remember.
Search, maybe it's out there through a Google search. Somebody, if you find that, you can put it in the chat. I did reopen the chat, primarily for purposes of those of you who don't have a Q&A box to use to ask your questions.
I will. I'll do another screen share. So if you want to
grab a shot of it,
screen grab, and then you can do like a Google image search. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's see. We have Maria Luisa Cesar says, good morning. I'm weighing an MBA program with a focus on ESG, and I'm curious if you think that your MBA degree was crucial in setting yourself up for a career transition into energy and solar, or broadly exploring a career in climate and sustainability. Would you do it again? Thanks.
I'm not sure if it's specifically for a career in climate. What I would say is that I think an MBA can be very helpful for career growth in probably any industry. and mine was not focused. I might have a different answer if mine was focused on ESG or if mine was focused on on something more focused in climate, but mine was a very generic, like international business MBA.
And I don't remember the year you got your MBA, but maybe there wasn't even an opportunity to get an MBA with a focus on ESG. It seems like that's fairly new.
You're probably right.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, so it sounds like an EMBA, or how do I keep saying EMBA? MBA in general is helpful, but in today's world where there are concentrations in sustainability and ESG and life cycle accounting and all the other stuff, knowing what you know now in your progression in your career, would you recommend having that as an add-on to a traditional MBA?
Yeah, I certainly think that it could be helpful for the direction that you want to if that's the direction you want to go. I would add on to that and say if there's any practical experience that you can get, even if it's volunteering, that would add on, I think, the value for a company. I think companies, as much as they appreciate the theoretical, also appreciate the practical.
Very good. Very good. So try to get both under your belt. Jonathan asked our very first question. Do you see the current state of marketing leaning towards design, or at the very least having the capacity to use design tools as part of the job requirements? Thank you. I'm not sure I understand the question. So
I think my understanding of that question is you're wondering like how if there's different aspects of marketing. There's the copy, there's the content, there's also the graphics, and then there's also like digital marketing. There's other areas. I think graphics are incredibly important. I think having, depending on your career, it can be important on at different levels. So as somebody who might be more junior, it could be really important to have that widespread of experience so that you can fulfill more needs. Especially if you want to be going into like a startup company where sometimes they'll only hire one marketing person and they'll expect to do everything. I think with some other like bigger companies that there's more defined roles, but having some graphic experience under your belt, even if you're more content or as you become more senior, being able to understand what looks good, why things look good, how the way that you place things have more impact, and being able to manage somebody who does graphic design is also important. I think that there is more emphasis on graphics, whether it's like infographics and making things really easy to understand and almost capture something at a glance. That is a skill that's becoming increasingly important.
Visual communication, for sure. Okay, the next most upvoted question at the moment is from Ryan. Ryan says, fantastic presentation all around, exclamation point. Where do you see the most opportunity in the EV/electrification space, or at the intersection of renewable energy, for example, solar, and mobility/transportation? Where do you see the most opportunity in the EV electrification space, or at the intersection of renewable energy and mobility/transportation? Did that make sense?
It does. I'm not sure if that means like where the industry is going or what type of jobs there are. I can speak a little bit about like where the industry is going. In terms of where I think the industry, I mean, one, we have like e-mobility, right? Transitioning all of our vehicles to electrify them, whether that's the large ships, whether that's the large trucks, whether that's our individual cars. That's a massive transition. One thing that I haven't seen that I'm curious if it will become an opportunity is actually taking the shell of a car and transitioning it to an EV versus an ICE. Like everything stays sort of the same except for what that the powertrain just looks different. and if that will help transition. But I haven't seen anything written about that. That's sort of something that I think is like my own personal, where I think there's a big gap that could be answered. But I think EV charging is going to be one of the biggest opportunities, not just because there's more EVs, but because the EV charging allows us to do the EV charger itself allows a lot of opportunity to do really cool things with the grid. So that means you can turn your electric vehicle into a backup for your house. You can turn your electric vehicle into the part of the grid so that it could charge and discharge your battery based on when the grid needs that for reliability purposes, whether maybe it needs extra energy or maybe it needs to store energy for later, and the opportunities that are there. There's the vehicle to grid, there's the vehicle to home, it's being called more and more V2X because of all the opportunities that are there. That's where I see some of the biggest opportunities in the market, where things are headed, and the software and management of that, because it's going to eventually get to a point where we are where we're on a marketplace that allows people like peer-to-peer buying of electrons from people, and EVs will play a role in that, just as solar and standalone, or sorry, battery energy storage that's not e-mobility, like the standing batteries. So that's where I see a lot of opportunity and growth in the industry. So I hope that's what you meant and that I was able to answer your question.
Excellent, thank you. And just as a side note, related to e-mobility, there was a very recent podcast on the podcast called Zero. I recommend that podcast if you haven't listened to it. And they talked about the overlooked sector of two-wheeler and three-wheeler vehicles in other parts of the world as a big opportunity for e-mobility. Okay, let's go to Harry. In response to not getting into solar until the second half of your career, even with expansion in climate tech funding, do you think it is worth it for a young professional to spend time and energy targeting more competitive sustainability/clean energy positions, or to focus on building those transferable skills and competencies first and then bring those in?
So I sort of don't think this is an either or option. I think I sort of was able, I took the jobs that I got, I moved forward with those, sort of, felt like this is probably the wrong word to say, but like I was sort of beggars can't be choosers at that point. It can be really hard to get your first job, your second job. So I worked on that. But at the same time, you can also continue looking. You can keep sending in your resume. You can keep looking, for other opportunities. You can find, where can you volunteer? Where can, is there an internship that you can do on the side? I don't think that it's something that you necessarily have to put on the back burner. And you can keep doing, even if you aren't able to find a position, you can keep doing that in parallel while you're building your skills. The second thing I will say to that is a lot of the tools that you guys have never existed while I was there. There were not clean energy job boards. There were not these type of webinars. It just did not exist. I was just sort of like on my own, and if I found a job on a standard job board, that's what I would apply to it. But I think you can still, in your current job, while you're building up your skills, every day you can be jumping on to Terra.do and or any of the other job boards that exist and apply. So that would be my advice. I know that's not necessarily easy with, long hours and other things that you're doing. in your life and other commitments that you have. But I think if possible, I would recommend the parallel route.
Okay, we have some folks that are interested in the Pacific Northwest, where the grid is already 75% renewable. How do we think about residential solar in places that are already largely renewable, and or as utilities switch more and more to renewables? Is there diminishing impact for residential?
Well, they're certainly trying to make it have diminishing impact. I mean, when NEM 3.0, that's the net metering scheme in California, when that got transitioned, it certainly have made solar less financially attractive. I think though what we are seeing is things like virtual power plants happen. We are seeing things like people building sort of microgrids for their, whether it's for their buildings, for their house, or for the like warehouses or other large CNI types of buildings. That is what is going to eventually happen. We are at a stage where batteries are becoming more attractive because of things like net metering, where and then adding on those distributed energy resources allow for things like virtual power plants to happen, which then pushes things towards that eventually towards peer-to-peer trading. But at least with virtual power plants, let me take a step back. Virtual power plants are this really cool thing. I know we defined what it stands for, but one of the things that I have noticed in the energy industry is for 100 years, the tech has not changed. If there was any other industry where the tech has stayed the same, we would just be, I mean, imagine using the same phones that they used 100 years ago. That's basically what we've done with the industry, with the energy industry. So there's been a lack of imagination for a long time with what can be possible and what can happen. And it's sort of been stuck. So instead of the current infrastructure where you have like these big, some people call them like big chapels of power production, whether it's coal, whether it's natural gas, which is a made up term, but or there's nuclear or whatever it may be. And then that energy is distributed out, to where it's going to be used. What virtual power plants do is it takes all the distributed energy. So you have your solar on your house, you have your battery, you have your electric vehicle, and you have other things like your thermostat. So both energy production, storage, and usage, and they're all connected to the internet. So they've all become IoT devices. And if you're able to connect all of those, let's say batteries, all of those thermostats connect all of those to in the cloud, that those batteries become a power station. So it could be, if you put them all together, it could be a 10 megawatt power station. It could be a 50 megawatt power station. And you can say, I need more, I'm going to need more energy at 1 p.m. The temperature is going to rise a lot at that time. So it's going to tell all those batteries to charge up to be at full capacity at 1 p.m. And then when 1 p.m. hits, those batteries can start putting energy into the grid. And that's what a virtual power plant is. But it can also, so that's it affects supply side for energy, but it also affects demand side, because what you can then end up doing is say, I don't want to charge my EV at this. Don't let any EVs charge at this time. We can put people's thermostats down just 1 degree, and say, when you're able to do that, it completely changes what the grid looks like. Energy is produced, consumed, stored in sort of the same neighborhood, the same location, and a lot of those high voltage wires that transfer energy along long distances aren't necessarily needed as much, which could mean forest fires that happened recently in Hawaii, or that happened a few years ago in California, may not be needed as much. So that's what virtual power plants are. But that there's so many things that go into the virtual power plants. It's that hardware, but it's also the software that manages it. It'll end up being AI also. There's just so much that can end up happening. When we go to peer-to-peer trading, there's going to be a platform that offers a marketplace for it. There's going to be UI, UX developers. Okay, sorry, I'm going to stop now because I can get really geeky about this. I don't know if I answered the original question. Do you want to go back to it and make sure I did?
Oh, I gotta scroll here, and you know what? I already dismissed it. In the funding by year bar chart you showed, why the dramatic decline from 21 to 23?
Because I think the big decline is that 2023 isn't over yet. And I think that might have only been, I'm not sure if it was like the first quarter or part of the first quarter or part of the first half.
Okay. Joe asks, do you think
and
there are
I'll add on likely that interest rates are affecting that.
Aha. Makes sense. Joe says, do you think there are any marketing/communication skills that you think are specific to climate jobs? Or is it all about applying transferable skills to this sector? An example I had in mind is whether a marketing professional may need a specialist skill set to make claims for a product without straying into greenwashing. Wow, that's a great question.
So I don't think there's any specific skills. I think there is some experience, like understanding your audience, but that's true of any, I think that's true of any industry. You have to understand who your audience is, who the stakeholders are. There's a difference between the decision maker and the user, and knowing the messaging that they care about. The other thing that I think is a transferable skill is the ability to keep asking questions to make sure you understand. As a marketer, one of my philosophies in marketing, I specifically come more from like content communications, is I would rather sound dumb for a second or a minute than be dumb for the rest of my life. If I do not understand a tech, if I don't understand what it does, what it means, then I can't communicate it to the people who will be interested in buying it, or be interested in selling it, or be interested in investing in it. I myself have to truly understand how it works. So that sort of intellectual curiosity to make sure that you are able to understand something. As an example from my past life is I was at a company that introduced completely new inverter technology. It leveraged something called multi-level processing, or multi-level switching technology and high-powered processing. Unless you're an engineer, an R&D person, you're probably not going to understand what that means. And I just kept asking and asking and asking until I finally understood. And at the end of it, I basically said, "Oh, so you digitized the inverter process?" They're like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." And everybody knows what digitization is. So that's, I think, one skill that you bring over from anywhere. I think the one thing that's super important that oftentimes marketers miss in transitioning to climate tech or clean energy is, I'm just going to be very direct about this, is we are still stuck in a capitalist system. It has to make money. It has to make financial sense. People will not, for the most part, people will not buy it if it doesn't make financial sense. One of the best ways to talk about clean energy is it is cheaper in the long run to put solar on your roof than to keep buying it from the utility. I think, and that's not a skill that's specific to clean energy. That's true of a lot of any company for the most part that I can think of. But I think sometimes people forget about it, because the reason we want to move into clean tech or to climate tech is because it's about making sure the world is a livable place for us, which should be enough, but it isn't, because we're still stuck in capitalism. So I think that would be the one thing that I would say. And the other thing I'll say is there is still greenwashing in some climate tech and clean tech, and understanding what that is can be important for deciding where you want to what type of company you want to join. So like as an example of that, like my personal choice is I could never join a carbon capture company.
Okay, very good. In the meantime, Sven's question is the next one on the list. My background is in B2B software companies scaling operations for marketing demand / lead generation and sales teams. Have you come across much opportunity for this functional area of marketing in the solar and energy industry?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of, most solar companies are B2B companies, you know, throughout the supply chain, whether it's manufacturer, distributor, or even like EPC, the energy procurement construction company, and they definitely need to have digital marketing funnels. They definitely need software for digital marketing. So yes, for sure.
In a word, yes. Okay, Jared would like to know, what was one thing you wish you knew before making the transition?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I mean, I think I'd probably just go back to what I was talking about before, like the solar coaster. That how businesses, um, how like an industry that's evolving, what that looks like, how it affects businesses, whether, you know, you'll see mergers and acquisitions, you'll see companies leaving the market, you'll see companies growing strong and like, you know, things moving around a lot. And I think the main reason I'm sort of saying that has more to do with like, you know, I've been through layoffs in the in companies. And it's more of like, hey, this isn't about me. It's about what the industry is going through. And just sort of making sure to internalize that, but also that, you know, things will there's other opportunities out there.
Awesome. Okay. Mark says, thank you for sharing your career and pivot timeline. I'm particularly interested in that pivot point coming from the telecom industry. I'm trying to weigh what is the best way to get the foot in the door of the renewable energy industry, i.e. upskilling in some program or certification and or being willing to take lower level position to gain experience.
So I really quickly, I did want to answer, I saw something pop up about the comment I made about carbon capture. I personally do not believe that carbon capture and storage is a viable technology. I think the best way to do it is to let our nature, forests, trees, like stop cutting them down, keep building them up. And I don't think that any of the tech that we have is ever going to be as good as what evolution has done over the past, I don't even know, 10 million, 100 million years. I'm terrible with those numbers. That's why they've been talking about it for carbon capture and storage for 30, 40 years. The tech just is not going to, if people cared about it, they would not be doing it. So that's sort of my explanation around it. I feel like if people like Bill Gates truly cared about it, he'd just buy up the Amazon and preserve it. He has enough money to do it. So that's my personal feelings on it. If you have different experience or understand the tech better, more power to you. Okay, so the question that you had asked was that you read was about moving from
the pivot. I'm trying to find the question again.
I think it was about moving from, not from IT, but from telecom into solar or into climate. I mean, I think there's going to be, it depends on how you look at telecom, but I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity with some of the telecom and clean tech, sort of as I mentioned. It may not be direct, but I'm not sure if I'm answering the question exactly as it was laid out. Were you able to find it?
Okay. Yeah. I'm particularly interested in the pivot point coming from the telecom industry. I'm trying to weigh what is the best way to get the foot in the door of the renewable energy industry, i.e. upskilling in some program or certification and or being willing to take a lower level position to gain experience.
I think it depends where you are in the telecom industry. Like, is it marketing? Is it in development? Is it, so it's going to depend. And I think again, I don't think this is an either or. I think you can do both and see where that takes you. What ends up being the faster path, and which, if you're willing to take some, are you looking to move in quickly with the, potentially lower level positions? But I still think you can focus on your transferable skills.
We have about 4 minutes left, and to the point of transferable skills, you had a really beautiful slide with your skills, and then you had what looked like a little mock slider on there where you were sort of beginner to proficient. I thought that was a really nice way of visualizing one's skill set in a nonverbal, but you can tell that you're a marketer. Like, the visual was awesome. I got it right away, which was much better than trying to read down through your list and say, I'm this, I'm proficient at that, and I'm a beginner at that. So I would love to see that graphic again as well. I want to honor time here. I did ask everyone to stay long enough to complete our poll. I don't know how much time you have, Jessica, but I do want to recognize that we are almost at the top of the hour, and our poll might take a minute. So I think if you can answer one more question in 1 minute, we might come out just about right. So the next one up is, how have changes in the mass media landscape changed your approach to PR?
So I don't know if I have a great answer for that. What I will say is I focus more on industry media. And that's been most of my focus for most of my career while I've been in solar. And that has not changed too much. I have been less in the top tier media. I've certainly been in social media. I think the biggest change is I don't put any resources into Twitter. Would be one of the biggest recent changes. And I think Facebook probably there's a little bit less impact, and we'll see what happens with Threads.
Okay, and with that, we're just about at the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And while I do that, Jessica, if you could let me know what your availability is. We have 2 more unanswered questions, it looks like.
Check to see if I have a meeting right after this that I have to hop to.
Okay.
I think one of the I just do want to get in before it ends is, like, also feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. I'd love to hear and see where you end up, where you're going. I tend to be very active on LinkedIn, sharing news stories and things like that, or just information about the industry. I have another few minutes.
Okay, thank you so much for that offer to connect on LinkedIn. While people are filling out the poll, it looks like we've got, some of you have finished it, but we need a few more answers. Okay, so Amit asks, how have you seen the IRA helping with the solar transition? Is it enough, and will it continue for the long term?
It went a little fast. I couldn't hear everything because it went a little fast. Sorry. I was reconnecting with my Bluetooth.
Okay, no worries. How have you seen the IRA helping with the solar transition? Is it enough, and will it continue for the longer term?
So I'll answer the first question. Is it enough? No. Is it way better than anything we've ever had? Yes. Not just for us, but like for the solar industry, but for the environment, for climate change. Like, nothing like this is a massive piece of legislation. And like, not to get too political, but like, this is like what Biden was able to pass through is just so incredibly critical for the climate. And we need more, but we could never have gotten this, I think, without Biden. For the other question, we are seeing local manufacturing. We are seeing the cost of solar and storage going down. We're seeing more companies come to the US and want to put the manufacturing here, more of the supply chain. That means more stability in the market. That means lower prices. We are seeing more companies interested in going solar, putting solar on their roof, adding batteries. We are seeing the EV market just grow faster than we've ever seen it before. It has surpassed all predictions that have been made about how quickly it will grow. I think we saw the industry really quickly grow, and I think we'd see even more growth if interest rates were lower. Interest rates are the biggest issue right now for solar, but I think we'd see an even bigger hit without the Inflation Reduction Act.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's finished the poll. There's a few of you still who have not quite done it. So I'm going to say two things. Lena Habiger had a question, and I'm going to ask you if you would try to connect with Jessica on LinkedIn, since that's more of a personal question that you have, and maybe Jessica can answer it with you privately. And then Christy Lovejoy and I would love to see the slide again where you had the visual of your transferable skill set. Could we end on that? Would you be willing to show us that?
Yep. So just some background on this, both this slide and the previous slide, like this slide. This is actually, this slide and this other slide are part of my, I had a infographic resume in addition to just a classic resume.
Oh, interesting. Very nice. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing that. That was very thoughtful of you to share that with this community. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. And with that, I think I will bid everyone adieu for the day. And thank you
I just want to really quickly
close
it with good luck. We are so lucky to have you wanting to join the industry, and I can't wait to see how you all impact the industry and where you go with your careers.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the offer to connect on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll have a lot of invitations coming up quickly. So best wishes to all of you in your climate transition journey. Thank you so much for joining this Terra event, and we hope to see you at a Terra event in the future. Take care, everyone.